Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting. My name is Eleanor Laming, and I will be chairing the Planning Committee meeting today. On the top table today are Tracy Lincoln, Development Manager, Chris Watts, Area Planning Manager, Stuart Pontin, Business Improvement Team Manager, is also present, and Emily Lipscombe, Section 106 and Community Infrastructure Officer, is present, and Leah Arthurton, Democratic Services Officer, is at the top table. We are not expecting a fire drill today, but if the alarm does sound, the fire exits are clearly signed either side of the room in green. If there is a fire alarm, please leave the building as soon as possible and assemble in the car park outside. This meeting is being live streamed. Members of the public are welcome to film proceedings as long as they are not disruptive to the conduct of this meeting. If anyone wishes to film or record this meeting, please identify yourselves now. Please, can you all ensure your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent? Councillors, please do not use your mobile phone while the committee is in session. We will have comfort breaks if needed at various times throughout the meeting. If you must use your mobile, then please leave the room. However, you will appreciate that this could result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the time you leave the room. The order of business is as set out on the agenda. We have 2 items to discuss this morning. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made in accordance with the Council's scheme of public speaking. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker or parish council, with a maximum of 15 minutes per category. Only people who have registered to speak will be able to address this committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, followed by questions from members of the committee to clarify something that the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is parish or town council first, followed by objectors, finally supporters, for example the applicant or agent. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes for each speaker. This will be followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions will only be to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents or photographs, for example, at the meeting. Are there any questions before I open the meeting? Item 1 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations? Thank you, Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The second item we're considering is in my ward. I have attended parish council meetings when it has been discussed, but I passed no comment and took no part in any discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Weinmark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, with the second item as well, I'm a county councillor and obviously they're responsible for schools, which is part of the development, so I just thought I'd say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other declarations? Okay, thank you. We move on to item 2. Apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes. So we've got apologies from absence from Councillor Vincent with Councillor Weinmark appointed substitute, Councillor Hempsall with Councillor Nurden appointed substitute, Councillor Baby and Councillor Creamy Gouvenlou.
Thank you. We now move on to item 3 of the agenda, to confirm the minutes from the meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 21st of June. Do we have any comments in terms of accuracy of the minutes? Are we happy to confirm them as a true and accurate record? Could you raise your hands if you're happy to confirm? Thank you. For those who are here, thank you very much. We now move on to item 4 on the agenda, where we have 2 planning items to consider. Item number 1 is planning reference number 20221626 in the parish of Great Witchingham, with the site address 5 Fakenham Road. This planning application was deferred from the planning meeting on the 21st of June in order to conduct a site visit. That site visit was conducted this morning, and so I invite the planning officer to present the application.
Thank you, Chairman. And so this application is seeking full planning permission to demolish an existing petrol station and to replace it with a new canopy, pumps, and also 2 new underground fuel tanks, as well as the conversion of an existing MOT garage to a shop. So the site itself, as you can see from the plan on the screen, it's located in the village of Lenwade off Fakenham Road, within a development boundary for the village. Its southern boundary is adjacent to the Grade 2 listed building known as Gothic House. I'll show you where that is on my screen. So it's here where the cursor is. And the site is also approximately 150 metres away from the River Wensum. The existing garage and MOT bay have been in place for some time. And apart from the canopy over the pumps and extensions to the kiosk, it's noted that there have been no significant upgrades to the site for some time. So moving now to some site context and photos. I appreciate you being on a site visit this morning, but again, just to familiarise yourself with the site, and for those who haven't had the benefit of the site visit, this is a view looking east along the Fakenham Road towards the petrol filling station. You can just see the white building on the right, so that is the current MOT garage, which is proposed to be converted to a shop. Again, it's a closer view of that. So you can also see the existing canopy of the petrol filling station and the kiosk in the background with the text shop written on it. So this is proposed to be demolished as part of this proposal. A view now looking west along the Fakenham Road. It's noted that the building on the left is in the applicant's ownership and forms part of the site. Now this is moving to the back of the site, looking west along the street. So to the right of the screen, you can just make out the hard standing which sits behind the MOT garage. Another view of that in the hard standing where there's a van currently parked. No property on the right and also on the left of the proposed site. A further view, we're looking east along the street. And again, another view to the rear of the MOT garage. Just to the right of that, you can just see a fence, so there is currently pedestrian access between the rear and the front of the site. So turning now to the principle of the development. So the application, as mentioned, is seeking to upgrade an existing and well-established business, which will provide benefits to the local area in terms of the economy and also the services it provides, meeting the overall requirements of the council's development plan. So turning now to the key considerations of the proposals, members should note that various objections and concerns have been raised during the course of the application, and these mainly relate to the impact of the scheme on the highway network, the design and scale of the scheme, and the impacts on residential amenity, and also environmental concerns. It's also worth noting that some support has also been put forward for the proposals. And in response to these comments, the application has been subsequently amended, and it now comprises of the following key components, which I'll run through in turn. So in terms of access, this is proposed via the existing access at the front of the site off the Fakenham Road to the north. The site also includes parking for deliveries, in this location here, and collections. So there's 4 parking spaces adjacent to the eastern boundary, and there's also a further 2 spaces proposed in front of the shop. So no vehicle access is proposed via the street to the rear of the development, and all construction access will be accessed off the Fakenham Road. It's also been recommended that the existing hard standing to the rear of the site, which you can see here, and as shown in the pictures, will be used by staff only to minimise any potential disruption to neighbours. So the Highway Authority have assessed the proposals and considers that the access arrangements are acceptable, given that the site already exists and has a well-established use. Furthermore, the applicant has confirmed it is not the intention of the development to encourage HGVs to access the site, and no objections have been raised by the Highway Authority in this regard. So regarding waste collection points, as highlighted on the screen here in yellow, these are proposed to be located to the rear of the proposed shop, which is enclosed by a fence along the western boundary of the site. So it's noted that the bin store is not located directly adjacent any private amenity space, and it would be separated by an existing outbuilding approximately here, and also fencing. And the condition is also recommended restricting collection times to weekdays. So in relation to the impact of the proposals on neighbouring dwellings more generally, it is noted that there is already a level of disturbance associated with the site and its historic use as a petrol filling station and MOT garage. In terms of the upgraded scheme, it is not considered that the level of disturbance or harm will be so significant as to warrant refusal of this application, subject to the conditions being recommended in your report. So turning now to the design and appearance of the scheme, this seeks to reuse the existing MOT garage and convert it to a new shop, whilst demolishing the existing kiosk building. The external appearance of the building will be upgraded with a new roof and painted brickwork to create a more modern appearance. So with regard to the canopy, this is proposed to be replaced with a slightly higher and longer canopy with a relatively standard design seen on other garage forecourts to enable modern fuel truck deliveries to access the forecourt. New lighting is also proposed, which is recommended to be conditioned, requiring further details to be submitted prior to the use of the development, and to ensure regard is had to the level of illuminance and any potential impact on neighbour amenity, including the hours of operation. So having regard to this, officers consider that the degree of change is acceptable, given that the canopy already exists and that it remains well within the site, which is not considered to be out of place with the character of the street scene. In terms of environmental considerations and risk of contamination, it should be noted the Environment Agency have been consulted on the application, and following amendments, which include confirmation that the old underground fuel tanks will be removed. They have confirmed that they have no objections, subject to the conditions to ensure that development does not result in any unacceptable risks to contamination, both on and also off-site. Additionally, the site is regulated by an environmental permit, which will be controlled by the Council's environmental quality team. So as such, and on balance, the proposed development is not considered to pose any environmental risks that cannot be controlled through suitably worded conditions as recommended in your report. So finally, in terms of the shop, it is noted that some concerns have been raised regarding the impact of the shop on existing businesses in the area. So whilst these are fully recognised, it is considered that given its modest size and as there's no planning requirement to assess the impact of the shop on existing services and facilities in terms of a sequential test, it is considered that the proposals are acceptable in this regard. So to conclude, members, the proposal will upgrade the existing petrol station and MOT garage for reconversion to a new shop. So whilst some impacts have been identified, these have been suitably considered and mitigated by way of conditions. In addition, the design and appearance of the proposals are considered acceptable and will help to enhance the appearance of the existing site. The proposals will also provide some small-scale employment opportunities as well as additional service to the village. So the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions summarised in your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer. Does the committee have any questions for the planning officer? No questions? Okay, thank you. Then we will move to public speaking. First, we have representations from the parish council. Do we have Peter Banks? Yes, thank you. Do take a seat.
All right, to leave this in front of me.
Yes, yes, of course. And in order to speak, just press the right-hand button on the microphone. You have 5 minutes from when you start to speak. We'll give you notice when you just have 1 more minute left. And when you start to speak, could you just give your name for the record, please?
Yep, sure.
Thank you.
Peter Banks, representing Great Mitchingham Parish Council. And firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for taking the time to defer the decision to understand the impact of the site, particularly will have on its neighbouring properties. As I said last time, I'll absolutely defer to the environmental agency around the conditions that they've suggested. The site clearly requires upgrading. There is, I believe, a current risk today in terms of the quality of its facilities, so we do welcome the site being upgraded. Our primary concern remains the impact on the community, and especially the neighbours, both adjacent, who are likely to be impacted by noise and light, and those who live opposite as well, who will also probably have consequential impacts. It is a large shop space, replacing a small kiosk, and I know you've kind of referred to it as a modest shop, but it's likely to be the new largest one in the village, which already has some retail outlets. So that does feel like a significant change. The opening hours as well are moving from 7 to 7 till 6 till 10. And again, the impact on the neighbours, there will absolutely be consequences for them. The shop itself, we believe, will become a destination in its own right. And that brings me to a real concern we have around the parking situation. So the application does contain 6 parking spaces, 2 in front of the shop, 4 to the left. It's really unclear what the commercial unit that's currently vacant, recently vacated, would have as parking allocation, but I can't believe that 6 spaces is sufficient. And I, talking with the rest of the council and also parishioners, we believe that will cause overspill either onto the highway on the lay-by, or people in the know will absolutely use the staff parking at the back. There is a school and a doctor's surgery, both accessed through the streets already, so the number of people who'll know about that parking is not limited to the residents of that road. So we are extremely concerned about the consequences of that, both on those who live nearby and then on sight lines and road safety. And then I know that you've talked about conditions there around light and noise. I cannot, looking at the site of the bin store and I'm really appreciating that bin collections are now going to be weekdays, there is no way that moving those great big bins is not going to impact the direct neighbour. And again, the light of the canopy is absolutely going to be shining straight into the recently built extension of the property to the left of the shop as you now look at it from the road. So those things, I can see that you've recommended conditions, but we would really urge some fairly stringent consideration so that the impact on the neighbours, which absolutely will happen, is as mitigated as possible. And that's our kind of plea to the committee, because we do recognise the site does need to be commercially viable and does require an upgrade.
Thank you. Thank you. Do any committee members have questions for the speaker? Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, that one. Yeah. Yes, I was. I may have missed what you said, but as I understand it, the owners never consulted or attended any parish council meetings or called a public meeting or knocked on neighbours' doors. Did they consult with you on this, about this?
No.
Pardon?
No.
No, I see. Right, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that one. Thank you.
Councillor Wymark.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to speak to us. So, essentially, what it sounds to me as if you're saying it, is you think the site does need upgrading and it's a good move in that regard, but there obviously are concerns that you have. And one of the concerns you're saying is about light from the building on neighbours. So if there was some mitigation put in place, then you think the neighbours would be acceptable to that? Or not? I mean, obviously you can't speak on their behalf, but I just wondered, you raised that as a concern. So I wondered if that was something that we could look at the conditions to make sure the light didn't actually go over into the neighbours too much. Okay.
No matter what conditions, there will be additional light on the adjacent property, which has the roof lantern, and on the properties opposite, which look directly at the canopy, and I think that's unavoidable. Any modern canopy is going to have better and additional lighting that's currently there. And if you look at the site plan, the canopy now moves to the property's boundary there. So I can't see any mitigation that's not going to not detriment that property. Although I appreciate that is a condition.
Do we have any other questions? Councillor Orber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as I understand it, there is going to be a condition on the lighting plan. Will be a condition. I'm assuming that this will you'll be able to enforce conditions as the project goes on. Presumably there'll be a lighting plan of some sort at some point. What can be done to mitigate those sort of things? And how is it going to happen?
Try and pick up that question. You're quite right, there is a condition being recommended by our environmental quality protection team for details of the lighting to be submitted. So that would be prior to use of the building. So that would need to include details of level of luminance, as well as a lighting plan, so we can essentially assess what the overall impact is, particularly in respect to residential amenity. That condition, if discharged or approved, that we would then be able to enforce that if there was a breach of that condition in terms of additional lights being added or the hours of operation being outside of what is agreed as per the general conditions as part of the planning application. So there will be controls in place beyond the submission of those details.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much for coming to speak today. And now we move on to our next speaker, Mr. Ron Cornell. Do take a seat. Thank you.
You'll have to forgive me because I'm like Councillor Leggett. I'm a bit mutton when we left here because of too much music in the 70s.
Okay. Again, may I remind you that you have 5 minutes to speak. We will give you a warning 1 minute when you've got 1 minute left. And thank you. And please give your name for the record when you start to speak. Thank you.
Dear Madam Chairman and members, my name is Ron Cornell. I'm an objector, and I'm also representing, I think, at the last count, 17 objectors which were on the website. Okay. 25 years ago, Lenwade Garage, which was sited on the other side of the River Wensum Bridge, closed. And a subsequent planning application was refused on the grounds of possible high on-site contamination. The incumbent fuel tanks were deemed hazardous to remove, and its close proximity to the River Wensum. The old forecourt was concreted over, and the site is now occupied by Norfolk Stoves. There are exact similarities with this present application. It has been proven that the ground has contamination. The highly volatile fuel tanks have been in the ground without any previous risk assessments or examination for over 60 years. Excuse me. And its close proximity to the River Wensum. The one extra important factor with this site is there are residents who live extremely close on each side, to the rear and to the front of the site, which you obviously noticed this morning. The proposed mini-mart shop with planned opening hours of 0600 hours to 2200 hours and the lengthening and raising of the canopy are wholly unacceptable to the residents who live nearby. I have been informed that financial matters do not form any part of the planning process, which I find incredulous. The applicants have, in my view, undermined their own application by stating publicly that they are experiencing difficulties with their monthly repayments on the original loan to purchase the site. The temptation to save money, cut costs and utilise cheaper contractors and materials in this present financial crisis is therefore a possibility. And remembering that was exactly what occurred to the Grenfell Tower development with disastrous and tragic consequences. It is therefore my view that Broadland Council have a duty of care to all the residents affected by this development to ensure that the applicants have significant funds and guarantees in place to be able to effect all the stringent and costly conditions and adequately and safely, and I respectfully request that the councillors consider an approval very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Cornell. Does anyone on the committee have any questions for our speaker? Councillor Orber.
Madam Chair, I think I might have missed something. I didn't read that there were any any contamination anywhere currently. Is that right?
Councillor? There is a report made by the applicants. There is a report made by the applicant's environmental report that is on the website, which shows there is contamination in various forms around the site.
Yeah, that's right. And essentially, there's tanks in the ground now. There is a degree of contamination associated with that, given the age and the historic use. Part of the process to move this forward has been lots of discussion with the Environment Agency to agree that those tanks are removed and that appropriate remediation is taking place to remove the existing contamination. So in that regard, it's almost an improvement on the existing or current situation. They need to provide additional details in terms of how they're going to reinstall the tanks and the various measures in place also to control that for the life of the development. So as you can see by the report and the list of conditions, a lot of controls in there. The Environment Agency are very strict on those, and they'll again be controlled by condition to ensure that there's no additional contamination both on site and, as I mentioned, also off site.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the concern was about the quality of the materials and cutting corners and those sort of things. I'm guessing there's quite stringent standards associated with petrol stations that will mitigate those risks.
Yep, absolutely. They'll have to meet the requirements of the conditions set out by the Environment Agency and their standards regardless. So they can't cut corners because the development simply wouldn't be able to be used if that was the case.
There are 21 conditions at the last count, and some of them must be met or adhered to before any work can take place, which is on the website. All that information is there out in the domain.
Councillor Orber. Yeah.
So which one of the conditions then are you most concerned about? Because it sounds like they've all been addressed. through conditions, and they will be monitored quite carefully. So are there any specific ones that you think are not stringent enough? I mean, I guess leaving the petrol station as it is will only make it worse in terms of the pollution. So those tanks, I think, probably do need replacing. So the upgrade is good to a certain point, but yeah, which of the conditions then are you most worried about?
There's been very little information concerning the removal of the tanks and the safety of the houses nearby. We are dealing with a very volatile product here, old tanks. I'm not an expert on what they feel or anything like that, but one spark could send the whole place up, and we are very concerned, especially the 4 or 5 houses, as you saw this morning. An explosion did occur, the liability, insurance cover, that sort of thing. So we're a bit concerned with that on the removal of the tanks. We agree that the tanks should be removed, but there must be really serious, stringent conditions attached to that by contractors, authorised contractors, and also top-of-the-range materials to do that job. And my main concern was we're in a cost of living crisis. By the applicant's own admittance, if it's on the website as well, there's an email there that came from the last meeting that they want to put their case forward, and they are stating that their financials, that at one point in that email they're saying they're willing to put money into the community project, and then further down that email they're saying that we're struggling with the interest rates that have gone up over the last few on the original loan to purchase the site. Well, that's a business decision, as I'm concerned. That's the risk you take.
Can I just come in there? So clearly you've got conditions proposed on your recommendation which adequately cover the regulatory requirements of those pollution controls and that contamination. We couldn't second guess that someone may not adhere to those regulations covered by either us or a third party, i.e. the Environment Agency. So we need to assess, are we satisfied the conditions are suitable and we've got the correct approach in place. Clearly, if there are any breaches, that's then down to enforcement either by this authority or by the Environment Agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for our speaker? No? Thank you, Mr. Cornell. Thank you for coming. And we now invite Mr. Deffley, please, to come and speak. Thank you. Thank you very much. And just to remind you that you have 5 minutes to speak, and we will give you a warning when you have just 1 minute left. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gary Deffley of JT Design Partnership, and I'm the agent for the application before you. I apologise for not being here for the original meeting, but due to short notice of the meeting date, I was away on leave. Firstly, I would ask the members to visit the site this morning to consider what they saw when they were there. It's a long-established fuel station, granted consent in 1978, 45 years ago, with very little alteration on site since, and it is showing its age. There's a disused MOT steel frame garage on site, which is unsightly, with a single skin corrugated roof. We'll check if the consent is granted. We'll do an asbestos report on that to show it's dealt with. There are only 2 hours with 4 filling points on the existing forecourt, which used to be sufficient in the past, but now there are more vehicles requiring fuel and the customers requiring a quick turnaround on the forecourt. The new scheme provides 4 lanes, 8 cars filling at maximum after the removal of the existing payment kiosk. This allows for more clear vehicle movements off the Fakenham Road. The 2 new fuel tanks are larger than the ones being removed, but they will be needed to provide enough fuel to serve the 8 filling points. The scheme also provides for a new canopy to cover the greater area. The proposed new canopy has a clearance of 5.1 metres, just 900 mm higher than the existing one. This height is now industry standard to allow refuelling by tanker suppliers such as Tesco and Shell. Smaller tankers would mean more visits and more disruption. As mentioned previously, hopefully the site will be supported by the local workforce. So if there will be only a few little need for staff parking. If there is a need, then the car park to the rear of the street will be reserved for them only. And those can be, we can have security posts, so they can only just use it. All the servicing of the site will be from the front court, forecourt, including refuelling, shop deliveries, customers' visits. Residential impact. There has been concern raised by residents about the possible increase of disturbance by extended hours. This business, because of its age, has unrestricted opening hours based on the old planning consent of 1978. My client has decided the opening hours to be 6 till 10, as we already been mentioned, Monday to Saturday, and 7 to 9 on Sundays, reducing those hours. We're aware of the potential for dust and noise generated on a building site. For the residents' information, the site will be secured with security fencing, which will be clad with a windbreak fabric, especially on the two boundaries adjoining the houses, to restrict the movement of construction dust. Damping down will be used additionally. We will, under conditions applied, provide a sound and dust management plan to the local authority to approve before start on site. There has been discussions about the windows on the bungalow to the left of the building viewed from Fakenham Road. There's no windows on that building, and the plan of the shop will be that we'll lose all the windows on that side as well. The shop will be insulated because it's not insulated at all at the moment, so the sound from the inside to the property adjacent to it on the plan there on the right will be very little, if at all. There has been detailed assessment of contamination of this site under the application, and very little contamination was found. In the previous meeting, a councillor mentioned the proximity of the River Windsor and its SSI and SAC classification, and was proud to mention its cleanliness, which is good to know, as this garage has been in operation for 45 years with no evidence of pollution leaching to this river. We intend to maintain that quality. In conclusion, we believe we have considered all the issues raised by the various offices of the Council and their consultees, and proven the application meets with all local and national planning policies. The MPPF actively supports the improvement and modernisation of existing businesses and building stock. We intend to liaise with the local residents as practically as we can to allay any fears they may have of the building process. It's important to my client's business that he has villagers' support in the future and does not want to compromise that working relationship. We ask the committee to support our application and approve the scheme as submitted. Thank you for your time and opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for our speaker? Councillor Wymark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarity, when you were giving your presentation, and thank you for that, you're talking about the original consent in 1978. Am I right in hearing that you said it's unrestricted use currently? It's unrestricted hours. So it could be used 24/7 as things stand. I just want to be clear. So that's what the planning consent is currently, and we're looking to limit that to 6 till 10. Okay, just for clarity. Thank you.
Councillor Orber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned parking bollards at the back. Is that part of your planning?
It isn't, but if there is concern that somebody that's not supposed to be parking there is parking there, then that is an option. And if they're staff members, they will know there's a bollard there, so they don't have to reverse into it. But so you can lift up posts with locks on that secure that area.
That sounds like a great idea, I'd have thought.
Yeah, just to jump in there is a condition 19 proposed for access site parking and service, and also condition 20 means of access to an egress, so you could potentially control that through that part of the condition.
Do we have any further questions, Councillor Orber?
So I'm a little concerned at the parking. So sorry, thanks, Madam Chair. A little concerned about the number of parking spaces at the front. How was that number? Was there a calculation to come up with that, or was it just literally what was available?
It is a little to do with what's available, but there is an assessment. There will be, obviously he wants to generate more business for his company, but the spaces there are more spaces because of the fact that he owns the houses either side as well. That has its own parking, but those will at the moment are being used at the front. They'll now go to the back. So there'll be probably another half a dozen spaces on top of that as well that serves both properties either side. So there's probably more spaces there than
Sorry, how is that going to work? What have you said? You said to the people there are spaces used at the front now that are going to go to the back. Where at the back are you proposing? Is it presumably the bungalow to the left and the house to the right?
Yeah, at the moment the staff for the business park because they use that building as accommodation. If they are being employed or not, as the case may be, those spaces will then go. They can use the spaces at the back as staff parking, so that releases areas at the front as well. But I was asked specifically to work within the boundaries of the site. But I know, having spoken to the client, there is flexibility on that.
Madam Chair, thank you again. I'm a little concerned again for the unit to the hairdressers, the ex-hairdressers, and the implication that might have on the parking that's there. Have you been asked to consider any parking for that unit? Because I presume it's going to stay as a unit. So what have you been asked to consider in terms of the impact of that on the car parking for the shop?
I haven't. Is it a straight answer to that? It's not being used at the moment. I haven't any idea really when he's likely to try and use it again. But I know that both those properties are used by staff members, and it is vacant. Whether he decide to take it down for his own reasons, I don't know. So that's where I'm at.
I have a quick question. I see you mentioned the fabric of the proposed shop has been considered and it will be more insulated than the current building. So that's good to see, but I was surprised to see no proposals in the plan for any EV charging with the move that we'll be seeing towards electric vehicles. Was that considered at all?
No, it wasn't. It's, you see a lot of EV charging in like motorway service stations and various places like that. I think the nature of this business is should kind of be a small shop where the shoppers are only there for maybe 10 minutes or so. And if they're going to charge any cars, then want them to be there for about half an hour or so. So I don't think it's practical on a garage site such as this. They have a lot more. I have seen them on garage sites, but I haven't been told to kind of use those. But it's limited space, and with the parking as well, that's going to have an impact on visitors as well. And I don't think it's a business that has a through flow of people quite quick. It's not like a motorway service station. They have lunch and sit down and all the rest of it. This is a convenience shop arrangement.
Okay, thank you. Have we any more questions? Yes, Councillor Leggett.
Could I just clarify this car parking thing? Because looking at the plan and standing where I was this morning, the canopy area I think is going to be a bit nearer to the main road with the new tanks and that. And then you've got an area shown car parking for shop. Did you comment how many car parking spaces? You may have said, but I didn't catch and hear. And then you've got to allow, as the other councillor has mentioned, parking for the hairdresser. Or I know it isn't a hairdresser at the moment, but any other business might be there. So just confirm to me how many parking spaces there are for people coming in to use the diesel and the petrol, and also using the shop, and it's quite a big area, the shop is going to be.
Yeah, at the moment, the long edge to the north of the site, just up a bit across to the right, keep going to the right, where that little leg turns out, the 2 cars parking there at the moment.
It's going to the right of where you just did is that parking the building?
There's two spaces, tandem spaces there, where people park around. The other parking space there, 4 there, and then another 2 in front of the shop. That's what's on the application.
So roughly how many car parking spaces are there?
Well, there's 6. There's 6 designated for the application. There's 2, which is part of that shop's use. The hairdresser, if you want to call it that.
So 4 there. Didn't you say that's for car parking as well? That's for the hairdresser.
Yeah.
So, in other words, for the business, for the application we're looking at, there are 6
Yes.
parking spaces.
Yes.
Yeah, just to clarify, you're quite right, there are 6 separate car parking spaces, but you could potentially also park under the canopy, as you might if you're filling your car up and popping into the shop for convenience to pay and pick something up. So overall, there's a greater potential quantum of parking.
Thank you. Have we any more questions at all? Oh, Councillor Orber.
Sorry, me again. Thank you, Madam Chair. Are we allowed to consider more parking required for the unit, for the hairdressers? Are we allowed to request that more spaces are created for that? Rather than parking 2 vehicles side on, you could park them 90 degrees, if you like, and create quite a few more spaces along there. And that, to me, seems sensible, because you're going to get a few people using that facility, whatever it turns out to be. And I'm not sure whether we should include that as part of this application, or whether or not we should include it. We should ignore it. So I feel like we should be considering that in the whole, rather than just breaking it up.
If I can come back on that. So clearly you've got an application in front of you with a red line and proposed number of car parking spaces. So I think first of all, we need to assess whether or not we think that level of parking is acceptable. However, we do have a proposed condition on your report which will require a detailed scheme of parking layout. Clearly, the rearrangement of parking within that area will need to be satisfied by the Highway Authority in terms of how that is those cars manoeuvre in and out of that site. And clearly there's a constraint in terms of the amount of space on the site, but yes, absolutely that layout can be considered in conjunction with the Highway Authority to maximise the level of numbers of car parking spaces on the site overall.
Thank you. Any more questions at all, or can we move on to our next speaker? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for coming this morning. And so now we invite the local member for the ward, Councillor Peter Bullman, to speak on this application.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do I need to introduce myself? Probably not.
Yes, well, but just to remind you that you have 5 minutes to speak, and we will give you a warning when you have 1 minute left.
I assure you, for a politician, I shall be brief. This is a bit like deja vu, because we met previously, and one of the key issues was I was very keen for you to see the site. You hadn't seen the site, and I thought it very difficult for you, therefore, to make a really reasoned assessment of the validity of this application. I'm pleased to see the agent representing the developer here today. I had thought it might provide greater clarity. I have to say to you, I think I'm more confused now than I was before. And why am I confused? Well, this whole issue of parking and the use of space seems to me to be uncertain and vague. and I'm not sure that you can make a decision based on what you've actually heard this morning. I'm pleased that you actually had a site visit, because now you will begin to appreciate the impact that this is going to have on the neighbours. Do we need more retail space? Where is the business plan? I haven't seen any business plan that would justify a fairly substantial shop in the village, which already has quite significant retail provision. I'm unconvinced by the need for this canopy to be raised. It's allegedly for the delivery of fuel. Fuel is delivered already. The canopy as exists is sufficiently high for that to happen. What is the implication? Well, it's quite clear. This will be used for increased HGV fuel dispensing, and that obviously is going to cause a greater impact on the environment and the neighbours. Therefore, I think you should look very carefully at this application as it stands, because I believe you don't have sufficient information to draw a conclusion. It's very vague about what's going to happen to the site going forward, because clearly there is space for greater development. You have already empty premises. What are they going to be used for? You need reassurance, I believe, in order to make a proper assessment of this application. So, from my perspective, I think you should not reach a decision today. I think you should look at it again in much more detail. I think the developer, frankly, has a much greater obligation to ensure that what actually is in front of you is going to be as watertight and secure as it can be. Yes, we welcome the fact that the storage tanks, the fuel tanks, will be replaced, because obviously they're past their sell-by date. And who wouldn't object to new petrol pumps, because it does look a bit of unsightly at the moment. So please bear in mind what I've said. I'm glad you had a site visit. I'm sure you'll appreciate the congestion that already exists and would continue to exist. And this whole issue of parking, to me, is unresolved. I rest my case, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bullman. Do any committee members have questions? No? Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming to the meeting this morning. And so we now move out of the public speaking session and back into committee. Could I just remind members of the committee that those who are not at the site visit this morning cannot engage in the discussion or vote on this application? Do we have any comments from councillors? Now we move into discussion prior to voting. Councillor Alber.
Well, this is a particularly difficult decision, I think, because on the one hand, leaving the petrol station as it is a bit unsightly, and it definitely needs some upgrading. So I don't think leaving it as it is the right decision. However, there's a lot of objections to this solution, specifically from local residents. And I think we all want to see an improvement in our local facilities, but it's how that goes about. I think there's quite a few conditions put onto this proposal that I would have thought would have reassured members here today that the proposed solution has been carefully thought about and a lot of objections have been considered. I still think there's a few things that we need to debate. I think the opening hours is the biggest one, I think, that we need to have a debate on, and I'm not convinced that 6 till 10 is going to be suitable for the residential area that it sits in. I think perhaps a more 7 till 7 option would be better. So that's what I'd like to propose, if that's possible, to put that as a condition.
If I can just comment on that. So clearly in terms of materially to your decision, we've got an unrestricted site at present. So at the moment, the operation could be 24/7. So we do have to consider that materially. And yes, you've got an application in front of you that will create retail a greater amount of retail on site, albeit because there is existing retail. But is that reasonable to restrict the hours of operation when at the moment it is unrestricted? Obviously, you've had guidance in your report from your environmental health officers in terms of that impact around noise for your residential occupiers who don't believe any conditions are necessary or change in restriction in terms of the hours of operation. So I just put that back to you in terms of whether that's a reasonable requirement to ask, given that you've had your technical consultees advise on that basis.
Councillor Orber.
Yeah, I understand that there isn't a condition on opening hours at the moment, but the historical use of the site isn't 24 hours a day, and the historical use of the site doesn't include a shop and all of the extra noise and light pollution and those sort of things. So I do think it's something we should consider as part of this application, and I do think it's important that we restrict the hours, because it is, I know it's not exactly a change of use, but it is substantially modified change of use. That's my view. I don't know what anybody else thinks. We should, consider that.
Councillor Wymark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, and that's why I asked the question, just to be really clear about the fact that currently this site could be used 24/7. So I think to change to 6 to 10 is reasonable on that basis. I also think we need to consider, I know it's not used in an MOT site, but it could be tomorrow. It could be reopened and cars coming in and out for MOTs. Now, would that create more traffic than what's proposed? Quite possibly. Would it create more noise? Quite possibly. As I say, that was unrestricted. So I'm not sure about the MOT. Maybe that would have more restrictions on it. So I think the current use as could be used, I think would be more detrimental than what's been proposed. I think it's reasonable what has been put on the table. I know there's going to be some local objections, and always will be, and I understand that. If I was living there, I would think that I would have concerns too. I think with the conditions in place, and there are a lot of conditions to actually trying to ensure that this site is run well, it's safe, it's secure, and it has minimal impact upon people around, or negative impact, because there'll be positive impacts too. You have to remember that this site will be well used, I'm sure, particularly with the improved facilities for the fuel. So I think it would be far better. One of the speakers has said themselves, the site needs upgrading, and I haven't walked around it today. It absolutely does need upgrading. So I would support the recommendation on the table. I think it's fair and reasonable. There's been lots of other things said about finance, etc., and even local member brought up about a business plan. That's not a planning reason, to decline it. No, it's not a planning reason. So I think on balance, I would say that I would go with the officer's recommendation. Yeah.
Councillor Leggett.
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, the site needs updoing. Everybody who's spoken has agreed and made that point. And I'm just looking at the recommendation put forward by the office, approval with conditions. Now, there's only 10 of those, and no, but they aren't conditions, are they?
Yeah, they're a continuation of conditions. There's 21, or no, there's 31.
Are they all, so this question of means of access to and egress from the development, staff parking, they are definitely conditions, but of course I don't really know what the conditions are, what are the points and the basis of the conditions of means of access, staff parking and vehicular access. What does that mean in terms of me understanding that, quite frankly, with the potential in the future, 6 parking spaces for the business is insufficient. But how is that covered by condition number 30 and 31? Because they're continue with this, aren't they? Yeah.
Do we have a response from the planning officer?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. So there's 21 conditions in total, just to clarify, which is...
So I thought it was 31.
No, but it should be clear on the back of the... I'll turn you to the right page of the report.
So there's 10 of them. Pardon? I'm confused. They're at the bottom there.
10 there.
Oh, sorry. There's 10 there.
And then you've got another.
But
There's 31 on here.
I got down to 31 and I read out number 30 and 31. But I didn't understand the essence of what 30 and 31 means.
Yeah, apologies, I'm an older version of the agenda, but I've got the correct version on the screen. And
right?
you're correct, it is 31. And like you said, there's various headings in there that suggest what the conditions would be, and the majority of those are as recommended by the various consultees. So in particular, you were referring to things like parking arrangements and staff parking. More detail of that is provided within the report itself in terms of what those conditions are asking for. And then the page on the back of the report is the summary of those conditions, which would essentially be attached to any grant of planning permission.
So, Councillor Leggett, what we're saying is the principles are acceptable in terms of the general number, the distribution, the general access arrangements, but what is being sought is the precise details to ensure we have that particular control, and that's necessary from the Highway Authority's perspective to ensure that that scheme is delivered in accordance with that. So that will include where the parking spaces are, the size of them, exactly how the accesses are to be arranged and laid out. So it will require a further submission to the council in consultation with the local highway authority to make sure that those things are suitable. In terms of your staff parking and vehicular access, that's in recognition that there's staff car parking to the rear of the site. Clearly it's been shown on the plan, but we need further detail to ensure how the cars can get on and off that site, if there's going to be bollards as previously advised, etc. So it's the specific detail to ensure the controls or the appropriate layout is secured.
Councillor Wymark.
Thank you, Chairman. We're talking about the car parking as well, and I think we have to think about how people use these places. When I've used similar setups elsewhere, that I'll drive in, fill up my car, as I said, and leave my car there when I pop in the shop and pay and get a bag of crisps or whatever. So I think you've got to realise that actually day-to-day usage, there are a lot of people will not use the car parking as such because they'll be filling up their car and then driving out again. So I think we can't just look at the designated car parking in isolation to actual day-to-day use, how people actually use facilities like this. So I think that's something that we need to consider, rather than just looking at the number of car parking spaces in isolation. So for me, I think that, it's looking at the whole picture together about how people actually would use a site like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just thinking about local residents. Can we restrict the time from 7 till 7 and think about run the application or whatever, or give more condition to, to the car park and all these? More car park spaces,
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Was it around car parking spaces?
Yeah, I think we can get a few additional more car parking spaces near the houses in the right or left. So.
Yes, obviously we'll talk through in terms of the car parking arrangement. Clearly there's a condition which we can require in terms of the layout. Clearly there are some car parking spaces that are associated with that residential property to the right-hand side of the garage, which are indicated to be reserved and retained for that residential use. But and obviously we've got constraints in terms of the amount of car space we've got on the site to accommodate parking. Clearly the condition can require the details of that layout to be further agreed to ensure that we can maximise that in a safe manner.
That's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Orber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I still think we ought to be considering reduced opening hours from 7 till 7. I just think having a shop close by, having staff leaving, is going to be substantially different from an MOT current. It could be used as an MOT garage, and that's really only going to be until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at the most. I think a shop will have different usage, and personally, I would like to see the opening hours restricted from 7 till 7. And I think with all the other conditions, this is probably the only one really that, one of the ones that are going to have the biggest impact, isn't it, the opening hours, especially where it is in the residential area. So can we put that forward as an
Councillor
amendment?
Orber, is that a proposal?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Proposal
and is that
to
a
reduce the hours.
proposal together with a recommendation that we approve this application?
Yeah, yeah. If we put the hours from 7 till 7, I'm happy to approve it with conditions.
Yes, so we have a proposal to approve this application with a change in the condition on the opening hours of the shop on the site, the facilities on the site. Is there a seconder for that proposal? So that is lost. I mean, I'd like to thank officers for the comprehensive report and for doing the site visit this morning, which was very helpful. I realise that there are many concerns indicated by the public responses to the consultation. There are 27 objections, 15 comments and 3 in support. And there are, of course, a huge number of conditions recommended. It comes to 31. But in support of this application, it is to upgrade a petrol station that already exists. It is needed as a facility in the area, and it is within the development boundary. So it does meet the policies of GC1, presumption of favourable development, GC2, development accommodated within settlement limits, and it also meets the National Planning Policy Framework 93D to ensure that established shops and facilities and services are able to develop and modernise. So this application does meet that. It also meets the policy MPPF 120. It uses brownfield land and it uses it more effectively. Against the application, on the other hand, there are serious concerns raised about possible environmental pollution, which I had concerns about, possible impact on the highways and possible impact on the amenity of the area. However, MPPF 111 says development should only be prevented on highways grounds if there's an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be secure. And we have assurances that that will be mitigated for in terms of a plan which includes staff parking plan, plans for access, plans for turning and egress from the site. So the Highways Authority have actually recognised that there may be more traffic due to the shop, and therefore the layout should be clearly planned, approved and retained, and that is in a condition for this application. There are as well, I believe, mitigations in place to address the hours of operation, the lighting, the noise and the disruptions from construction and waste collection. The canopy size increase may be seen to be an issue. It will be bigger, but it is still replacing an existing canopy. And there are serious concerns relating to environmental issues. There is existing contamination of the site. It is close to the River Wensum, which is a site of extreme ecological importance, but I believe a proper assessment has been done by the Environment Agency and the Environment Quality Officer, and that mitigation is detailed to address the risks and conditions have been applied to address those concerns. So I think it does comply with policy EN1, the need to improve and enhance the biodiversity of the district. EN4, pollution, where pollution might be an issue, adequate mitigation measures will be required. And MPPF 183, we should ensure that a site is suitable for its proposed use. Given that there are numerous conditions put in place to address all of these issues concerned, on balance, I would like to recommend approval of this application. I cannot find any overriding material considerations to prevent approval of this development. I'd like to propose, therefore, that this application is approved together with the conditions outlined in the application. Is there a seconder for that proposal?
Councillor Laming, can I just come back on the clarity?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, before we move on.
Sorry, before you
Planning
move to vote, just to clarify, having checked the conditions, Councillor Laming is correct in terms of the conditions have been appropriately applied. However, you will note conditions 1 to 10 and conditions 11 to 20 are a repeat. So you have a total of 21. You have a total of 21 conditions. If you note on page 27 of your report, you have conditions 1 through to 10, starting with time limit. That is then repeated from 11 to 20. So in actual fact, you can disregard 1 to 10 and start from 11 to 31. So just to point out, the conditions on page 27 are repeated again on page 28 plus some additional conditions. So there are 21 in total, but you are correct in terms of substantively, though all of those conditions cover the necessary requirements. It's just you've got a repeat. Thank you.
So which ones do we determine now? So, yes, so when 30 and 31 have been cut off.
No, so you can essentially, conditions 1 through to 10 are an exact replica of 11 to 20, so they're the same. And then 21 through to 31 are obviously the additional conditions.
Oh, I see. I didn't hear what you said. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. And so we have a proposal from myself to approve this application, and that has been seconded by Councillor Wymark. Could we vote? Please raise your hand if you're in favour of that proposal.
1, 2 in favour, Chair. Yes, 2 in favour, Chair.
And could you raise your hand if you're against that proposal?
There's 3 against, Chair. And then any abstentions? And 1 abstention, Chair, so that's lost.
So we haven't got a counter proposal on the table at the moment.
No.
So we need a counter proposal. So we haven't got a counter proposal on the table at the moment, so we would need a counter proposal in which to vote on.
And sorry, could I remind members that clear planning reasons based on planning policy need to be provided to go against the officer's recommendation?
So my suggestion of reducing the hours then, is that not a planning proposal? Yeah, so I'm happy to go with it if the hours are made 7 till 7. As a counter proposal, everything else as it stands.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Orber. So Councillor Orber has proposed that we approve this application with a change in the conditions of opening hours of the facilities from 7 till 7. Do we have a seconder for that proposal? Thank you.
7 to 7.
Thank you, Councillor Mia. So we have a proposer and a seconder. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands.
2 in favour. 2 in favour. Any against? There's 2 against, Chair. And any abstentions? And 2 abstentions.
We don't have a conclusion to that, so can we put forward the recommendation again to the committee? Yeah, as proposed. So, Councillor Auber, would you like to propose again that we recommend approval? Oh. What, the 6th of 10? Yeah. So we go back, sorry about this, we go back to the recommendation of the report. I'd like to propose again to... Could we discontinue the meeting just while I clarify what the procedure is, please?